Wow. Thank you so much. So this is going to be us going into the white malice. We're going to we're going to read it from chapter 13 through chapter 14. And to those who have been following, right? So I am going to start now, right? So let me know if the audio is still perfect. Like you can still hear me, okay? So that I'm not just talking. Then after this, if we still have that time, we will take calls as well, okay? Thank you so much. So let's get down to it. So chapter 13, American CIA agents and Kenyan CIA agents. So, as of 30th June 1960, the date set for the Congo's independence from Belgium grew ever closer. The Directorate of Plans, I'll leave it this way first. Let me see how that goes. You tell me. If it looks awkward, let me know. Or sounds awkward as well. Right? Thank you. Pulapenga. So you are here. All right. So now this is also the road to the Congo independence. Right? So let's continue. The Directorate of Plans at the CIA was carefully penetrating the region. One of the agents it used in its Congo operation was Howard Imbre, a 40-ish American from New York City, who was a veteran of the Wartime Intelligence Agency, the OSS. He joined the agency in 1948 and 5 years later became the Communist Party officer for what was then the Near Eastern African Division. The position required him to develop agents locally to report on the spread of communism within their borders. For his Congo-related work, Imbre operated under non-official cover. This was a new development for Imbre. On his earlier assignments in India, Sri Lanka, and Ethiopia, he had been attached to the US Embassy. Speaking about these posts, he noted sardonically that his diplomatic cover did little to conceal his CIA role, since the State Department officials did not want us confused with the Foreign Service. Instead of designating them with the rank of the standard FSO, Foreign Service Officer, he recalled, we were always registered as FSR, Foreign Service Reserve Officer, where everybody looked down the list and spotted us right away. The CIA had a very big operation in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital, where Imbre worked from 1956 to 1958. As a matter of fact, he recalled years later, we had bugs on the Soviets, Czechs, Egyptians, and I think a Bulgarian came in. At the US Embassy, he added, there was a wing which was known by the locals as the CIA wing. In the basement, we had many tape recorders and a number of people spent their entire day translating from the various take on these things. We had a house rather far out in which the tape recorders were running night and day, causing a great deal of problems for us because we have to explain the high bill for electricity, which we did by getting somebody in the telephone company to ignore it. But serious problems were caused by the heat generated by the running of the equipment. So they repeatedly had to buy fans, which often didn't work. In addition, said Imbre, we had a central place where the telephone lines were connected to our apparatus. This was about 4 feet on the ground, and we built in the house of a former agent. We built a garage around it to make it appear as if it were a garage. And then we buried this stuff. Well, about every 4 or 5 months, they would decide to extend the telephone lines, which would mean we would have to go there, unbury the lines, put them near the surface so that they would find them, but they wouldn't find our bugs. And to do that, you have to get through Ethiopian and which sticks like a word distinct. It was a 6-hour job getting this stuff to the surface and then getting it back in until we all hated it. It was a successful operation. Inbred reflected with his usual dry humor, except that the people never said anything much over the phone. As an NOC in the Congo, Imbre was in far more danger than he had been in his previous postings. He was required to deny any connection with the US government. Should he be exposed as a CIA agent, he would be unable to expect diplomatic immunity or any kind of protection. In this way, the government had recourse to plausible deniability. Larry Devlin was operating under official cover in the Congo, but he had operated as an NOC earlier in his CIA career. For his first post, he worked under the cover of writer for Odo Travel guys in Europe, rather, a front for agents abroad that was widely employed by the CIA in this period, and which was exposed in the 1970s during the Watergate scandal. Imbre maintained absolute secrecy for most of his life about his CIA career. When the Church Committee investigated the role of CIA personnel, Imbre was completely invincible. But in 2001, at age 80, Imbre suddenly abandoned his commitment to secrecy. In February of that year, he gave a candid interview in his home to a high school senior. Then 4 months later, he gave a long interview to the oral historian Charles Stuart Kennedy under the auspices of the Foreign Affairs Oral History Project, which is organized by the Association for Diplomatic Studies and Training, ADST. The project's interview provide a valuable source of information about former participants in the U.S. foreign affairs since World War II. Imbre died the year after his interview with Kennedy. His obituary in the Washington Post acknowledged his role at the CIA. When Devlin published his memoir, Chief of Station, Congo, in 2007, he made no mention of Howard Imbre. However, he included Imbre's wife in his short list of acknowledgements. Ina Imbre, for locating phone numbers and arranging contacts. It is unclear why Imbre chose to reveal his CIA career in his 8th decade, but he appears to have had a strong and independent mind. A colleague in the diplomatic service described him as amusing, mischievous, a bit vicious in fact, not high-minded. He was extremely clever and gifted at languages, fluent in French, Italian, Urdu, and Hindi, and with a working knowledge of Sinhalese, Sanskrit, Portuguese, Latin, and Greek. In the interviews he gave in 2001, Imbre explained the context in which he had started work in the Congo. Africa was emerging as of 58. We saw this all coming. There was independence for all of the African regions, and we knew we had to get in there before the Soviets. This was the reason for his shift to unofficial cover. So they told us to go outside the agency, develop a business, and work at the United Nations in getting sources there and see what we could do. Imbre set up a public relations office in New York with the name Overseas Regional Service Associates, ORSA. One of those titles that are as meaningless as possible in the pursuit of the spy game, as put by a cultural historian writing about the CIA in the Cold War. Imbre's junior partner in the project was Thomas L. Goodman, formerly an explorer in Southeast Asia for a US museum. The headquarters of ORSA was located at 333 East 46th Street, a newly built 20-story high-rise. It was ideally placed for the purpose of their covert work. The building was only a couple of blocks from the United Nations, which facilitated easy access to delegates and events. There were opportunities for casual meetings with United Nations delegates and staff, since the building provided office accommodation for some employees of permanent missions to the UN. It also housed the offices of some African-related organizations, such as the African Research Foundation, which received CIA funding and had activities in Nairobi. The ORSA office building was situated next door to the African American Institute, another CIA front, which similarly benefited from proximity to the UN. To establish their cover of working in Africa for ORSA, Imbre and Goodman initiated the overt projects that were clearly associated with the firm. These were featured in Fortune magazine, which published an article on their effort to support small enterprises in various African territories, matching the investments of locals with an idea for a business. In Ibadan, they facilitated the manufacturing business of rear-end carriers for bicycles. And in the Congo, they worked with a Congolese man to develop a plan for processing pharmaceuticals in Leopoldville. Other projects included the making of wax candles. The placement of the story in Fortune may have been arranged by the CIA. It was then published in Negro Digest. Imbre served as a contact in the US for CIA assets. That is, sources of intelligence who provided information but were not agency personnel who had come from Africa. One such asset was Washington Agre Jalango Okumu, a Kenyan who was brought to the US in 1958 to study at Iowa Wesleyan University on the recommendation of Tom Mboya. He was then in his early 20s, 50 years younger than Imbre. He was opposed to European colonization in Africa and was profoundly influenced by the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Nkrumah. In nearly 13 hours of interviews in 2016 with the American historian Nancy J. Jacobs, Okumu gave an account of his life and his involvement with the CIA. With Okumu's permission, Jacobs published a detailed account and analysis of the interviews. Okumu told Jacobs that he was the CIA's blue-eyed boy. His connection with the agency, he explained, had been initiated by Imbre and Goodman. They telephoned me and said they were looking for Kenyan or African leaders. I possibly had relationships with them. When pressed by Jacobs, he could not say much more about them. What? They didn't call me and say, here we are, CIA. They may call, and even at that time, you don't know who they are. I don't think Howard Imbre or Tom Goodman even now, even now, if they call me, would think that I know who they are. They still would want to believe that I didn't know who they are. After 40 years, Do you think they will tell you? The racism Okumu encountered in the US horrified him. In Iowa, he told Jacobs, I knew I could not go to bed because I was afraid I would be lynched. I knew I was going to die. He eventually fled Iowa to attend Harvard University, where he enrolled in the 1959 International Student Relations Seminar, ISRS, a summer program. According to Karen P. Paget, in Patriot Betrayal, the ISRS was established as a recruiting vehicle by the CIA in 1953. It was first directed by CIA employee Ted Harris, who had been the National Student Association's president in the late 1940s and went on to become AMSAC's associate director. Harvard University, which has been described as having a cozy relationship with the CIA over the years, was where Larry Devlin, a student in international relations, was recruited to the agency. He didn't finish his degree, but went directly into the Office of Policy Coordination, OPC, the covert operation wing of the CIA at that time. The ISRS, which Okumu attended in 1959, gave the CIA time to conduct background security checks, explains Paget. Okumu evidently met the criteria. Regardless of his weak grades from Iowa, it was the sponsorship of the CIA, he told Jacobs, which then got him into undergraduate studies at Harvard. He received some funding from the CIA front, the African American Institute. Okumu explained to Jacobs the nature of his ambitions and great hopes at that time. I had a burning desire to get education and come back as a leader of my country. But this was not to be. When he returned to Kenya, he worked for a railway parastatal and then for the government, but was imprisoned in 1968 for alleged corruption. My life was mixed up, he said. In the relationship between Tom Mboya and Ogenga Odinga, and that mix-up ruined my life forever. I was never able later to pursue a career and stick to it without being hit up by the powerful friends or enemies of either side. The Kenyan government may have had another reason to turn sour on Okumu, suggests Jacobs, that he had continued his connection with the CIA while working for the railway parastatal. After his release from prison, Okumu worked as a commercial attaché in the US Embassy in Nairobi for half a year. He left Kenya in 1971 to work for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in Vienna, where he stayed for 15 years. While he worked for UNIDO, he became involved in secret negotiation between B.J. Vorster, the Prime Minister of Apartheid South Africa, and Julius Nyerere, the President of Tanzania, in the mid-1970s. This involved secret visits to Pretoria, arranged by the South African Bureau of State Security, BOSS, an organization that sought to crush resistance to white minority rule with brutality and murder. It is unclear how Okumu became entangled in these developments and to what extent the CIA may have played a role. Jacobs illustrates our article with a photograph from August 1976 showing Okumu with Vorster, with another South African government official, and with Hendrik van der Berg, the head of BOSS. Another photograph shows Okumu in 1977 sitting in the company of Ian Smith, the prime minister of the illegal and deeply racist government of Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. Okumu moved into the public arena and the news in 1994 as the mediator who brought the Inkatha Freedom Party of Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the Zulu leader, into South Africa's first democratic election. The CIA may have been operating in the shadows of these negotiations. In June 1991, Buthelezi had announced to journalists that he had met with the head of the Central Intelligence Agency in Washington. Okumu received widespread acclaim for his role as mediator. Some doubts have been cast on its importance, on the grounds that the forces leading Buthelezi into the election were much bigger. It has been suggested that Okumu's intervention was limited to that of a face-saving device for the IFP leader. If so, it would nonetheless have made a valuable contribution to the outcome. In the judgments of Jacobs, Okumu was an unreliable witness. She describes him as an opportunistic and shadowy go-between for hire by white American, South African, and British conservative Christians. However, much of the information he gave about his dealings with the CIA appears to be accurate. It is backed up by his references to Howard Imbre and Thomas Goodman. Having set up UNSA, Howard Imbre spent most of his time at the United Nations, UN, visiting Africans and encouraging them. But soon, the whole thing changed because they sent me out to Leopoldville. I guess it was in April and May of 1960 to help with the CIA station. This work involved developing sources for the oncoming independence of the Congo, and I did all sorts of jobs along the chief of station and a couple of other guys. He left the Congo shortly after independence on 30th June. The objectives of the agency in pre-independence Congo were set out clearly in a CIA paper titled CIA Position in Belgian Congo. Reply: Political actions and operations. The paper was not dated, but its provenance reveals it was produced in 1960, evidently in the period leading up to the end of June. Using the acronym KUBARK, that's a KUBRK, to refer to the agency, it noted the role of KUBARK in the Belgian Congo during the period prior to 30th June 1960 should be to ensure that US aims for the area, both the Congo and the other parts of the continent whose relationship with the Congo will affect our aims, can be implemented. These aims were made explicit. The election of a government oriented to the West and friendly to the US, and the identification, isolation, and exclusion of groups that were supported by or oriented towards the Soviet bloc. In order to assist the election of a government oriented to the West, Imbre was passing money most of the time to people in the Congo. Yes, he told Charles Stuart Kennedy, I was in hotels and dealing with the people the best we could and passing out money. One of my people, he added, was Al Kanaroge, who was to play a larger part with the Bulaba element. What the heck? Bulaba element. Who are the Bulabas? Blue, Bulaba. Tipnumbu is a CIA asset as well, right? They have a compromise on him. Okay. So Tipnumbu is a drug dealer that was supposed to be